10 Sports Central will be going over 5 reasons why the Notre Dame Fighting Irish will go on to beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and why this team is going to go on to the national championship for a chance to win a college football playoff title. And this has been a team that has had an outstanding season. There's no doubt with that, as Notre Dame is currently 10-1. Only losses to Clemson in the ACC championship game, and this team has been playing extremely well all season up until this point. We're going to be going over 5 reasons why Notre Dame is going to proceed on to the national championship, and these reasons will be in no particular order. That being said, we're going to look at your number 1 reason, which is going to be the rushing corps for Notre Dame, which is led by Kyron Williams, and he leads this rushing corps with some of the best stats in the ACC, and you also got Chris Tyree in there as well, so you can't forget about him. But really, this rushing corps for Notre Dame has been a huge part of this offense. I mean, you got Ian Book, of course, at quarterback, who has been outstanding all season, but you also got this rushing corps led by Kyron Williams, who's been outstanding too. I mean, this is going to be very important for Notre Dame in this matchup. Like, they're going to have a big game against a very tough Alabama defense. Like, I think we all can agree here that Alabama's rush defense is one of the best in the nation. So Kyron Williams is going to have a huge game here, but he's got a great offensive line to work with, which the offensive line has had a huge factor in why Notre Dame's been successful this season. I mean, if you look at the offensive line last year, like, it was good, but I mean, this season it's been extremely improved, and it's been huge for Kyron Williams in this offense in general, and that's a big reason why, once again, I think Notre Dame has been so successful. If you look at Kyron Williams' stats on the season, he's put up 1,300 yards with 13 touchdowns as well. So really, he's had quite a season for Notre Dame. Number 2 is going to be the experience on the Notre Dame side. This team has played well in important situations outside of the ACC championship game this season, which, I mean, the ACC championship, I don't know what happened there with Notre Dame. I mean, I want to say it was just a bad game, but this team has played very well outside of that. Like, once again, if you remember, which I'm sure all you Notre Dame fans remember, like, if you look at Notre Dame, they beat Clemson back in the early parts of November. This was a team that did beat Clemson. I understand that Clemson was without Trevor Lawrence there, but still, I mean, you beat a Clemson team that's been so successful recently, and that is a huge step up there. And so for Notre Dame, like, they've got a very experienced quarterback in Ian Book, and Ian Book's been very experienced in these situations as well, which is going to come into play definitely in this game, which this is probably the biggest game that he's ever played in his career. I mean, I can pretty much guarantee you that, because, I mean, for Ian Book here, I mean, you're playing an Alabama team that has probably been one of the more dominant teams we've seen in recent history. And so, I mean, for Ian Book, this is going to be huge for him. He's got to be extremely sharp. He's got to be very efficient in this game if this Notre Dame team's going to pull an upset on Alabama. But they also have Brian Kelly leading, who has coached in a college football playoff game before. If you remember, Notre Dame did play against Clemson a few seasons ago in the college football playoff. But, I mean, Brian Kelly's going to have a huge part in this. Ian Book has been great, and he's very experienced as well, and that's going to be huge for Notre Dame moving forward. Number 3 is going to be Ian Book, their quarterback. Speaking of which, he's an experienced quarterback who can win big games. I mean, if you look at him over the season, once again, this Notre Dame team has won several big games this season. That includes that Clemson game back in November. And, I mean, he's playing as good as he ever has, in my opinion. Like, if you look at his stats, I mean, his completion rate hasn't been as good as it has been in the past, but he's got some great yardage. He's put up 2,600 yards on the year, 15 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions as well. So, I mean, if you look at his interceptions, he's only thrown 2 this season. So he's on track to possibly only throw 2 or 3 in the entire year, which is extremely impressive out of any quarterback. And that's going to be huge for this Notre Dame team, especially, is the turnover margin here. And Ian Book, considering he hasn't thrown many interceptions this season, it is likely that he doesn't throw any interceptions here, or maybe just one, which is going to be huge for Notre Dame. Like, the turnover margin is always huge in any game, let alone a game against Alabama here. And Ian Book is known pretty well to protect the football well. So that's going to be very important this matchup, going up against an Alabama team that has been extremely dominant on defense. Once again, he's playing as good as he ever has. He's got an improving offensive line to work with, which is going to be huge here. And he still has upside moving forward too, which is going to be huge for Notre Dame. Number 4 is going to be the pass defense for the Notre Dame side. And if you look at Alabama's main positives on their offense, it's got to be their rushing or their receiving core. Like, they got Devontae Smith, who is as dominant of a wide receiver as you can really get. And if you look at him, like, he's a Heisman contender. He's argued to be one of the best receivers that Alabama's ever had, which I do believe he is. And so for Notre Dame here, they're going to have to be extremely dominant in the secondary, and that's going to include being having great coverage on Devontae Smith and making sure that he doesn't have many yards for the Alabama side. But Notre Dame has done very well in the passing defense. I mean, they've allowed 224 passers per game, which, I mean, that seems like a high number at first, but that is actually a really good number for the passing defense with 224 yards. So, I mean, if you look at that here, Notre Dame has been very good on the passing defense. That's going to come into play major against Alabama here, because Alabama's been very, very good in the passing game this season. Several players in the secondary for Notre Dame will also be in the NFL, so that's going to help a ton, knowing that Notre Dame's got some future NFL players on this secondary. Lastly, number 5 is going to be Brian Kelly, head coach for Notre Dame. He's had experience with leading Notre Dame to championships many times before. I mean, we've experienced seeing him in the college football playoff as well previously a couple of years ago. So Brian Kelly does have experience in these situations. He just played in a major game against Clemson. That's going to be important coming into this game, and he has coached in situations like this before too. Let me remind you, and he's currently got one, if not the best team he's ever coached too. You got to consider that as well. I mean, he's had some great teams over the years. I think he led a team to a national championship back in the early 2010s. I mean, I would probably argue to be the best team he's ever coached before, and that has got to be a really good sign for him as we head into this game against Alabama. That being said, though, that wraps up my 5 reasons why Notre Dame's going to beat Alabama and proceed on to the national championship. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this game. Let me know what you thought of this, and if you enjoyed this video, slap a like on it and subscribe as well, as it helps to the channel. I really appreciate that. But once again, appreciate you guys all watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. I'll see you all later.